This is my true story. My daughter looked me straight in the eye one night and said, "You're not a real father. You just paid bills." She said it while cutting her steak, like it was nothing. Her husband laughed with her, like they'd both been thinking it for a long time, and I sat there, chewing through more than just food. I didn't say a word, because in that moment I realized something. They didn't see me as a father anymore. Just a wallet with legs, just a man who used to matter. You won't believe what I did after that. Before I tell you, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Your support keeps these stories alive. That night, I went to bed without finishing dinner. I heard them laughing in the kitchen while they packed up leftovers I bought, sitting at the table I built, under the roof I paid off. My heart wasn't broken. It was something colder, something still. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I didn't even look back when they turned off the kitchen lights like I wasn't still in the room. That night, I thought about every little thing I ever did for her. Every silent sacrifice, every time I stayed quiet so she could speak, every dollar I spent while pretending it didn't hurt. But that night, I finally listened. Not to her words, but to her tone. That tone that said I was nothing but a card swipe and a ride to the airport. That tone that erased decades of love in one dinner joke. The next morning, she went out shopping, like nothing happened. Like I was still going to be the fool who kept paying. She tried using her card. It got declined. She tried again. Declined. That afternoon, she called the bank. The bank said nothing was wrong. But there was. I had shut it all down, quietly, completely. I canceled everything I was paying for, the streaming bills, the credit lines, the accounts she thought were hers. The house? It was still in my name, and the moment she laughed at me, she handed me the scissors to cut the cord. That's when I realized she didn't grow up entitled. She grew up loved. But somewhere along the way, she confused love with obligation. And I had been paying the price for that confusion for far too long. She wasn't always like that. I remember the girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat while I drove us home from school, her tiny face pressed against the window, clutching the lunchbox I packed every morning. I remember the quiet way she used to say thank you after I helped her with homework, even when she got the answers wrong. I remember the first time she rode a bicycle, her legs wobbling, her eyes terrified, but I ran behind her the whole way, even after my knees gave out. She looked back and smiled. That kind of smile you think about years later when the house gets quiet. Every moment felt like it mattered. I bought her new shoes before I bought myself socks. I stayed up when she was sick, even when I had to be up at 4 a.m. for work. I skipped vacations, parties, and promotions so I could be the one standing in the school hallway when she walked out. It wasn't about being noticed. I didn't need credit. I was her father. That was the reward. I paid the bills, sure, but I also paid attention. I knew which classmates bullied her. I knew when she got her first crush. I even knew when she pretended to be asleep so I wouldn't worry. I learned her silences, her moods, her fears. There was never a time I didn't want to be her father. Even when her mother walked away and left me with all the pieces, I didn't ask, why me? I just figured out how to love harder. And maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe loving harder taught her that I would never stop, that she could grow cold, distant, rude, and I'd still be there holding the umbrella. I don't think she realized the cost of being a father like that. It wasn't just money. It was the hours, the missed dreams, the part of myself I shelved for nearly 3 decades just to make sure she never felt fatherless. I didn't tell anyone how lonely it was when she stopped hugging me in public. When "I love you, Dad" turned into "Can I borrow your card?" I let it happen because I thought it was a phase. But years passed, and the little girl I raised turned into a woman I barely recognized. I saw it in her eyes. There was no softness left for me, only expectation, only boredom. I became background noise in her life, something she tolerated, and still, I stayed. The shift didn't happen in one day. It was slow, like rust on a garden gate, unnoticed until it squeaks when you try to open it. There wasn't a moment I could point to and say, That's when I lost her. It was more like a series of small disappearances. First, she stopped asking me to walk her to the bus. Then, the phone calls turned shorter. The texts, colder. Holidays became half visits. She'd come late, leave early, and sit on her phone the entire time in between. I would cook her favorite meals, the ones she used to beg for as a child, and she'd barely touch them, offering some excuse about calories or being full. I didn't complain. I just packed the leftovers and put them in her bag, pretending it didn't sting. Once, she asked me to help with a down payment on a new car. She said it would mean the world. I emptied a savings bond I was holding for retirement and handed her the check. She didn't say thank you. Not even a hug. Just a, cool, I'll go tomorrow, and walked out the door. That night, I sat by the window with the receipt still warm in my palm and realized I had taught her everything, except how to be grateful. I kept thinking it was my fault. Maybe I'd overdone it. Maybe by giving her so much, I made her believe the giving would never stop. That a father's love came with a permanent guarantee, no matter the damage. Even when she married that man, the one who always smirked like he knew more than me, like he pitied the old man with no life, I bit my tongue. I paid for their honeymoon. I helped them furnish their first apartment. I bought them groceries for the first 6 months because she said money's tight right now, and I didn't want her to feel ashamed. I was trying to protect her from struggle, but all I did was shield her from consequence. She didn't see the quiet sacrifices I made every week, how I skipped medication sometimes to help her with rent, how I pretended I was on a diet when I couldn't afford groceries for both of us, how I sold my fishing gear just to surprise her with a new microwave. None of it mattered. To her, I was just Dad, the guy who pays. I remember one Christmas when I gave her a handwritten letter instead of a gift. It talked about the day she was born, how I cried when I held her for the first time, how she once told me I was her hero. She read it halfway, then laughed and said, "Dad, you're so dramatic." She never finished it. She left it on the counter. I still have that letter, creased, untouched, sitting in my drawer. I used to blame myself for all of it. I thought maybe I wasn't fun enough, or modern enough, or emotionally available enough. But now, looking back, I see it clearly. I was never her priority, just her safety net. The person she knew would never leave, so she stopped trying to keep me close. And the truth is, that kind of neglect feels worse than hatred. At least when someone hates you, they acknowledge your presence. But when someone ignores you, when someone reduces you to a background hum in their busy lives, it's like being erased in real time. I would sit at that dining table waiting for her call on my birthday. Sometimes it would come late, sometimes not at all, and every time I told myself, she's busy, she'll call tomorrow. She never did. Years passed like that. Birthdays without candles. Father's Days without cards. Winters without her voice. And still, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to seem needy. I didn't want her to think I was guilting her into love. But deep down, I think I hoped that one day she'd just remember, that something would click and she'd show up, knock on my door with a pie or a smile or even just a real hug. That day never came. Instead, I got the kind of silence that bruises deeper than words. And somehow, I kept showing up. I kept paying. I kept loving in the dark. I think that's the saddest part. Not that she changed, but that I kept waiting for the girl who never came back. The last time I truly felt like her father was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was 18, packing for college. I stood in the doorway of her room, watching her fold sweaters and argue with the zipper on her suitcase. She looked up, saw me staring, and smiled. Not a big smile, just a quiet one, like a secret we both understood. I offered to drive her, but she said her boyfriend would do it. Still, she let me help carry her things to the car. As she shut the trunk, I handed her a small envelope. Inside was a check and a note that simply said, "In case you forget how much I love you." She hugged me that day, tight, like maybe she was scared of leaving, like maybe some part of her still needed me. I held on to that hug for years, even when the phone calls stopped, even when she forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. I'd close my eyes and replay that hug. That final moment when I thought, maybe, just maybe, I did something right. But time has a cruel way of changing the meaning of memories. What once gave me comfort began to sting. That hug turned from reassurance into a farewell I never recognized. It was like I'd been dismissed without realizing it. And as she moved on with her life, new job, new husband, new circle of people who never knew the man who raised her, I was left behind, a closed chapter in a book she no longer wanted to read. I tried to stay useful. I tried to remain necessary. When she had a health scare, I was the one who drove across the city with soup and prescriptions. When her car broke down, I was the one who paid for the repairs. When she said she was too tired to deal with bills, I offered to automate her payments from my account, thinking it would only be temporary. It wasn't. Months turned into years. I became her silent support system, always present but never acknowledged. And slowly, without realizing it, I disappeared from her heart. I wasn't the father who once braided her hair or read bedtime stories or cheered too loudly at school recitals. I was just a number in her banking app, a convenient lifeline she never thanked but always expected. Her husband never helped. He encouraged the distance, called me old school and overbearing. He mocked the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I held utensils. Once at dinner, he made a joke about how I was just the ATM with a recliner. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because she didn't want to defend me. I sat through that dinner with my fork trembling in my hand and a smile frozen on my face. That night, I went home and cried into a towel because I didn't want the neighbors to hear. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the realization that my daughter had become someone I wouldn't recognize if I passed her on the street. She had my eyes, but not my values. My blood, but not my heart. And still, I didn't confront her. I thought confronting her might break whatever thread still connected us. So I stayed quiet. I let her pull further away. I told myself that love meant endurance, that being a parent meant accepting the pain, that maybe if I just kept being kind, being generous, being invisible, she'd eventually notice. But she never did. The more I gave, the less she remembered where it came from. One day she called and said, "Dad, can you cover my card this month? It's just a glitch. I'll pay you back." I said yes. Of course I did. She never paid me back. A week later, she bought concert tickets and posted them online with a caption that read, "Nothing like spending your own money on memories." I stared at that post for hours. Not because I was angry, but because I realized that she no longer saw me as a person, just a background figure in her curated life, a placeholder, a relic. And in that moment, something in me began to go quiet. Not break, not explode, just quiet. Like a light dimming in a room no one uses anymore. I started talking to the photo of her mother more often. I'd sit beside it in the evenings and whisper updates about how things were going, how I was feeling. Sometimes I asked her what we did wrong. Sometimes I cried into my hands, apologizing for not being enough. I kept that pain to myself, wrapped it in politeness, folded it into silence, because I still believed that someday she'd look up and remember. That maybe, just maybe, the girl I once tucked into bed would come back. But she didn't. And what came next, what she said at that dinner table, proved she never would. It didn't happen all at once. That's what people don't understand about heartbreak. It's not one sharp knife, it's a slow carving over time. The first cut came on my birthday. I hadn't planned anything, just hoped she'd come by. I cleaned the little kitchen, laid out 2 mugs, and reheated the same stew I'd made the last time she visited. That was over a year ago. I waited the whole evening. No knock, no call. Just silence and the echo of an old voicemail she left once, years back, saved on a phone I didn't know how to delete messages from. That night, I turned off the lights early and told myself maybe she got caught up in something important. But then I opened my laptop the next morning and saw pictures. She and her husband had gone out to celebrate a friend's party. Laughter, drinks, cake. Her dress glittered like she had nothing in the world to worry about. The next wound came when I asked if she needed help setting up an emergency fund. I'd always saved. Not much, but enough to keep her afloat if the worst came. She waved it off. "You're sweet, Dad, but we're good. Just automate the bills like before, okay?" She said it like a command. No thank you, no warmth, just a business instruction. I swallowed my pride and did it. Again. Then came the dinner. A family gathering hosted by her husband's side. I wasn't even told until the night before. "If you can come, come. If not, no biggie," she texted. I went. I wore the best shirt I had, brought a bottle of wine even though I don't drink. I sat quietly at the edge of the table, ignored by strangers who didn't care who I was or how many Christmas mornings I'd worked overtime to buy her the bike she wanted. At one point, someone asked what I did for a living. Before I could speak, her husband laughed and said, "He used to do something with numbers. Retired now, just relaxes and pays our bills." The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile. She didn't correct him. She didn't even look at me. Just leaned in closer to him and whispered something I wasn't meant to hear. But I did. "He loves feeling needed. Let him think he's helping." That one broke something, not fully, but it cracked the glass. I drove home that night in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other on my knee just to keep it from shaking. The next day, I went to the drawer where I kept every card she'd ever written me. Birthdays, holidays, Father's Days. I read each one. Some were scribbles from when she was 6, misspelled words and smiley faces. Some were teenage attempts at gratitude. "Thanks for always being there, Dad." I read them like scripture, searching for proof that I wasn't imagining things, that once I had mattered, that once she knew I existed as more than a debit card with gray hair. Then came the favor. Always another favor. Her husband wanted to start a business. Something about importing kitchenware or scented candles. I forget now. They needed a temporary loan. I said no. Not out loud, of course. Just softly. "I think I'll pass this time." Her tone changed instantly. "You're kidding, right?" I wasn't. "We've covered you through so much," she added. I blinked. We? What had they ever covered for me? I paid their rent when their lease fell through. I covered their grocery bills when they forgot their wallets. I sent money when their heater broke, when their insurance lapsed, when they wanted a vacation but didn't want to dip into savings. And yet, here she was, talking like I owed her something. I didn't argue. I just said, "I can't." That week, she stopped calling altogether. I'd check my phone and feel a physical ache in my chest. I didn't want drama. I just wanted her to care, or at least pretend to. I started counting the days since her last visit, then the weeks, then the months. Each one sharpened the reality. I was no longer family. I was a utility, an account to be tapped into when needed, ignored when inconvenient. One afternoon, I showed up at her house unannounced. I'd baked a pie, the same recipe her mother used to make. When I knocked, I heard footsteps pause, whispering behind the door. Then it opened halfway. Her husband stood there. He looked me up and down. "She's not feeling well," he said. I could hear her laughing in the background. "Maybe another time." I handed him the pie anyway. He didn't even say thanks. I walked back to my car and sat there for a long time, just breathing, just watching the clouds move across a sky that felt too big and too empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the old recliner with a photo album in my lap. Page after page of a girl who used to hold my hand in parking lots and call me her hero. Now I was a stranger outside her door, dismissed with a lie. Something shifted inside me that night. Not rage, not bitterness, just clarity. I realized I had built her world brick by brick. I had handed her a life of comfort, not riches, but stability. And she had turned me into a footnote. I was tired of being quiet, tired of being erased. The next time she called, it wasn't to talk. It was to ask. Again. "Dad, can you check if the card's been acting up? It got declined at dinner." I didn't answer. I just listened. She kept talking, unaware. And in that silence, I made a decision. One that would change everything. But I didn't shout. I didn't warn her. I just stood up, walked to my desk, and opened the folder I hadn't touched in years. The one with all the account numbers, the access, the power, and I finally used it. After that day, the distance between us turned from a quiet ache to something solid. Like glass I could press my hand against but never break through. She didn't call back about the declined card, not even to ask if something was wrong. She just sent a text 2 days later. Hey, just double-check the account when you get a chance. Weird glitch, maybe. A glitch. That's what I'd become. A background error in her lifestyle. I didn't respond. Not because I was playing games. I was just done being available on demand. For the first time in years, I didn't run to fix things. I sat in my chair. I drank my coffee. I turned off the sound on my phone and let the silence stretch out like a warm coat I hadn't worn in decades. I wanted to believe maybe she'd show up. Maybe she'd knock. Maybe she'd say, "Dad, I'm sorry." But she didn't. Instead, she emailed me. Formal. Cold. Just checking again on the bills. Need to make sure the utilities get covered before the 5th. Can you confirm? No, hi. No, how are you? Just an invoice wearing my daughter's name. I stared at that email for a long time before deleting it. Then came the final insult that didn't look like an insult at all. She invited me to dinner. A makeup gesture, maybe. Just a casual night, she said. Bring that salad you used to make. I did. I packed it in the same glass bowl her mother once used. I even brought the wooden tongs she loved as a child. When I arrived, I saw her husband's car, a few others I didn't recognize. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally, she opened the door, wearing an apron, looking rushed. "Oh," she said, like she didn't expect me. "You're early." I wasn't. I was exactly on time. She led me through the kitchen, past people I didn't know, all chatting over wine. She pointed toward the back. "Can you just set that in the sunroom? There's not much space in the kitchen." I nodded. As I walked to the sunroom, I passed the dining table, already full. Plates set, chairs taken, laughter growing. There was no seat for me. I set the salad down and stood there. No one followed. No one waved me over. I waited. 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, she came in with a small plate in her hand. "I'll bring you your portion out here," she said. "It's kind of chaotic in there." I nodded again. I didn't even look her in the eye. I just sat down in the quiet and listened to the voices from the other room. Her new family, her new circle, the life I had no place in. I ate alone. She never came back to check. I left early. Wasn't even noticed. That night, something else changed. Not in her. In me. I stopped defending her in my thoughts. I stopped justifying the distance as growing pains or stress or miscommunication. I saw it clearly now. I was no longer her father in the way that mattered. I was just the man who filled the silence when her bank balance didn't. I started cleaning out old papers the next day. Not in anger, just with purpose. I found letters I'd written her when she moved out. Encouragements, recipes, advice she never asked for, but I gave anyway, because I didn't want her to feel alone. I found a birthday card I never sent, the one I bought the year she skipped visiting me because they were traveling. It still had the tag on it. I threw it away. It meant nothing now. Then came the call from her husband, first time in months. "Hey, we're noticing some stuff's not going through. You okay over there?" I said I was fine. He laughed. Cool, just making sure. You know how banks can be." I didn't answer. He filled the space with awkward chatter. I let it die naturally. Didn't offer to help. Didn't offer anything. That week, I started walking more. Something about the wind reminded me I was still alive. I passed houses where fathers played catch with their kids, saw grandfathers with toddlers on their shoulders. I didn't feel bitter. just distant. Like I was watching a movie I used to be part of but wasn't cast in anymore. At the grocery store, I ran into an old friend. He asked how my daughter was. I said, "She's doing fine." He smiled and said, "She always loved you so much, always said you were her hero." I nodded, then went home and sat in the dark for hours, remembering when that was true, remembering when I used to matter. More bills came in, ones I used to pay without thinking. Subscription renewals, streaming services, her gym membership, her pet insurance, all under my name, all quietly draining the account I'd built with decades of sweat and missed holidays. I stopped each one click at a time. She didn't notice, not right away. But eventually, the silence turned into confusion. The emails became more frequent, then more urgent. "Need to fix this ASAP. It's not working again." "Did something happen with the card?" I didn't reply. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done pretending I owed her anything. The silence became its own kind of message. A new language she hadn't learned yet. The language of enough. I'd had enough. But even then, even after everything, part of me waited for her to come to the door, to say she remembered who I was, not the account, not the lifeline, but the man, the father, the one who carried her when she had fevers and nightmares and scraped knees. But she never did. Instead, she sent her husband again. "Hey, we just want to know what's going on. It's not like we're not grateful." That word, grateful, stuck in my teeth like a splinter. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. He waited, then shrugged. "All right, let us know when you're ready to talk." He left. I watched his car pull away, then went inside, locked the door, and sat in the same chair I always did. But this time, I didn't bring the photo album. I didn't make tea. I didn't light the old lamp. I just sat in the dark and thought, not about the past, but about the final thing I still hadn't done. The one thing that would make her understand. And I knew then, I would do it. Quietly, cleanly, not to hurt. Just to end the pretending. And when it happened, it would be permanent. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I didn't feel tired anymore. It was as if some piece of me had been holding on to the hope that she'd knock on my door one last time, and when that hope died, the exhaustion disappeared with it. I sat in the armchair until the sun came up. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink much. The house was completely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels permanent, not temporary. And I realized I had been waiting for a sound that would never come. Not her voice, not her footsteps. Just a change in the way she saw me. A return to something lost. But it never came. I boiled water for coffee but didn't drink it. I just watched the steam rise and disappear. I spent that entire day doing nothing but watching time pass. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't listen to music. I just listened to the silence and realized something. I wasn't lonely anymore. I was just done. Not tired, not bitter. Just done. I walked through the house, slowly, methodically. Each room held a memory. Each picture on the wall was a chapter I no longer lived in. I didn't touch anything. I didn't pack anything. I just walked and remembered and said goodbye in my head to every version of myself that had waited for her to grow up, waited for her to come back, waited for her to apologize, waited for her to see me. I went out into the backyard and looked at the swing I put up when she was 7. It was rusted now. The wood was faded, but it still swung gently in the breeze, like it was waiting for someone. I didn't sit on it. I just stood there and let the breeze move across my face. I remembered the day she called me a real hero for pushing her on that swing during a storm. She said I was brave, that I never let go of the ropes even when it rained. I held on to that memory for too long. I let it cover all the cracks that came after. I let it convince me she still believed it. But now I knew better. People don't say things by accident when they're angry. They say what's buried, what they've always thought but never said aloud. Her voice that night at dinner, laughing with her husband. "You're not a real father. You just paid bills." That wasn't a joke. That was the truth she'd been holding on to. And once it came out, it didn't matter what came after. The mask was off. The damage was permanent. That sentence rang in my head louder than anything she'd ever said in love. I went back inside, closed the back door, and stood by the thermostat. It still had her birthday programmed into it as a reminder for me. I turned it off. Then walked to the hallway and stood under the attic pull string. That attic held everything she left behind: toys, clothes, yearbooks, letters. Things I thought she might one day want again. I'd saved them all, for decades. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't saving them for her. I was saving them for myself, for the version of her that used to run into my arms, that used to fall asleep against my chest, that used to cry when I scraped my hand fixing her bike, then bring me Band-Aids with cartoon characters. That girl was gone. Not dead, just gone. Replaced by someone who saw me as a transaction, a utility, a placeholder. I didn't open the attic. I didn't need to. I'd already buried the past in my mind. There was no need to dig it up physically. Instead, I walked back down the hallway and into the living room. I turned off the lights. I let the room grow dim with dusk. And I sat. For hours. Until the dark swallowed everything. That's when I made the decision. Quiet. Clean. Final. No revenge. No noise. Just a quiet transfer of power. Back to myself. I would not tell her. I would not warn her. I would not try to explain or soften the blow. I had spent too many years softening myself, making excuses for her actions, and allowing the shadow of love to cover the reality of neglect. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I would simply act. And when it was done, it would be irreversible. That thought didn't thrill me. It didn't scare me either. It just felt inevitable. Like a switch that had been flicked one click at a time for years and had finally reached the end. I wasn't angry. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse what I would say. Because there would be nothing to say. She had spoken loudest when she laughed at me across the table, glass of wine in her hand, husband beside her, and said I was just the bill payer. That's all I'd been to her. A line item. A resource. An aging number in a system she controlled. But not anymore. I sat in the darkness and imagined what the silence would feel like when the final support disappeared. Not just the canceled cards, not just the missing payments, but the real foundation. The one she had no idea she'd been, standing on. That was my plan. Not to ruin, not to hurt, just to step back. Let her see the space I once filled. Let her stand in the silence and realize she had never stood alone until now. It was the only lesson I had left to give. Not through punishment, through absence. My love had been a bridge. She crossed it and burned it behind her, never thinking I'd stop building. But I had. That night, as the house remained silent and the streetlights buzzed outside, I closed my eyes and didn't dream of her. For the first time in years, I dreamed of nothing. Just a vast quiet, peaceful, undisturbed. And when I woke, I knew I was ready. Not for revenge, but for release. The breaking point had come. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A final, unspoken goodbye. She would never hear it, but she would feel it. The next morning, I made the calls. Not loud calls, not angry ones. Just quiet confirmations to the places I had been funding behind the curtain. I started with the credit card companies. I wasn't on her cards by name, but I was the sole guarantor for everyone. I had co-signed in silence, long ago, because she said she needed a little help during her college years. The accounts had grown over time, and when her husband lost his job, they used those cards like lifelines. She never once asked if the balances were getting too high. She assumed they'd always be covered, and I had covered them, every month, without fail. Until that morning, I called and revoked my guarantee, told them I would not be liable anymore. They thanked me, told me her lines would be reevaluated, I said nothing more. Then I moved to the house. The one she was living in. The one she told everyone they got a great deal on when they moved into town. She didn't know that I had bought it 5 years prior, under a trust. She didn't know that every month, the rent she was paying was being quietly deposited right back into her own savings account, an account I had set up when she had her first baby. She thought she was independent. She thought she had climbed her own mountain. But the truth was, I had been her staircase, and I was done. I called the real landlord, the property manager I had paid for years. I told him to deliver the notice, not eviction, just termination of lease. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. Then I called the insurance provider, the one that covered her husband's car, her home, their phones. All of it linked back to a policy I had bundled for family under my name years ago. I unbundled, removed them, quiet, silent, no explanations. The chain was coming apart, not with scissors, but with tiny, precise cuts. I sat in my kitchen while the first tremors rippled through her world. It didn't take long. By lunch, I saw a missed call, then 2, then 17, all from her. The same daughter who hadn't said a kind word to me in months. The same one who said I wasn't a real father. I didn't answer. I didn't block her either. I wanted her to feel the silence. Let it stretch. Let her ask herself what was happening, and why. By that evening, I received a text. Dad, something weird's going on with the bank. No apology, no warmth, just panic. I didn't respond. At 9 p.m., another message came in. Are you okay? Cards aren't working. Rent guy came by. Can you call me? I stared at it. Let the screen go dark. Then powered off the phone. The next day, 37 missed calls. I counted them. Everyone. I knew the number because I wrote it down. 37 times she tried to reach the man she said just paid bills. Now that the bills were gone, she wanted the man back. But he wasn't there anymore, not in the way she knew him. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I just felt done. For years, I had built a quiet kingdom of support beneath her feet, thinking she would someday turn and see the hands holding her up. But she never looked down. Only forward. Only at what more she thought she was owed. So I gave her what she'd been pretending to have all along. True independence. No strings, no safety net. No father who just paid bills. She now had what she said she wanted. Total separation. Full autonomy. The power to sink or swim without me in the shadows keeping her afloat. I didn't do it to destroy her. I did it to free myself. She had already left me emotionally years ago. This was just me catching up. One final act of release. And the most devastating part for her. She didn't see it coming. Because people who mistake love for obligation never imagine the day the obligation disappears. And when it does, it's not rage that greets them. It's silence. Clean, cold, permanent. She would get through it. She would survive. But she would never forget it. Not because of the money, not because of the cards, but because of the realization that I had always been there. Not out of duty, but out of love. And that love, once disrespected, does not return the same. I didn't take revenge. I took back my name, my role, my worth. And in doing so, I taught her a lesson no lecture could ever deliver. That fathers are not utilities. We are not background functions. We are not just bill payers. We are men who bleed quietly, who sacrifice daily, and who hope, often in vain, that the children we raise will remember us as more than a wallet. I walked out into the morning air, sun on my face, knowing I had done what needed to be done. She would never look at a declined credit card the same again. Not because of the money, but because of the silence behind it. The silence of a father who finally stopped paying and started living. I didn't turn the phone back on for 2 more days. When I finally did, the screen lit up like a warning. Voicemails, missed calls, unread messages. Some frantic, others quiet. She had even tried calling from her husband's number, her work line, even blocked numbers. There was a text from her husband that read, "Can we talk? I think there's been a mistake." But there was no mistake. That was the part they couldn't accept. The foundation they were standing on hadn't crumbled. It had simply been removed. Gently. Intentionally. By the same man they thought they had the right to mock. I went through the messages slowly, not because I was curious, but because I wanted to make sure there was nothing important. Nothing medical or urgent. Most of it was her asking me to explain what was going on. That phrase stuck with me, as if everything that had just happened wasn't the explanation itself. When a man removes his hand and the ceiling starts to fall, you don't ask why he moved. You ask why you never noticed him holding it up. I didn't answer any of her messages. Not yet. There was nothing to explain. She was an adult, a mother, a wife. She had made it clear that I was just a financial footnote in her life, a support beam she didn't think about until it disappeared. Her last message said, "Dad, we can talk, okay? Just, please call me." That one stayed with me, not because it softened me, but because it reminded me how far apart we'd grown. We can talk. As if it had ever been a two-way conversation. As if the years of silence, eye rolls, dismissive tones, and whispered jokes at family dinners hadn't happened. But they did. And once seen, they couldn't be unseen. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. So I went about my days quietly. I trimmed the hedges, reorganized the shed, went through some old boxes in the garage, found a photo of her as a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, holding my hand in a park. That picture hit me harder than any message. Not because of the smile on her face, but because I remembered that day. I remembered what it felt like to be her whole world. Back when Dad meant something sacred, before pride grew teeth, before love turned into expectation, before she stopped seeing me. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I just stared at that photo and whispered something under my breath that I didn't even know I'd been holding in. I miss her. Not the woman who laughed at me across the dinner table. Not the one who rolled her eyes when I asked if she needed help with groceries. Not the voice that said I just paid bills. I missed the little girl who used to draw me crayon hearts and run to the door when I came home from work. That version of her had vanished long before I pulled the plug. That's what people don't understand. They think revenge is about the moment. But it's not. It's about years. Layers. Cuts that never healed. Quiet betrayals. Birthdays missed not by accident, but by decision. A slow forgetting of the man who used to carry them through storms. That's what hurts. Not the loud disrespect, but the quiet replacement of love with convenience. She didn't need me anymore. That was fine. But she wanted to humiliate me on the way out. That was not. And that's what made my silence permanent. Days turned to weeks. I heard through a neighbor that she and her husband had to move in with his cousin while they sorted things out. Her job was unstable, their bills were stacking, and still, I didn't hear from her. Not a real apology, not even an admission. Just the quiet shuffle of people trying to reverse a fall without knowing how high they had climbed. I went to the mailbox one afternoon and found a letter. Handwritten. Her handwriting. That surprised me. Inside, she wrote 4 paragraphs. The first one blamed me. Said I had blindsided her, that I should have warned her. The second was softer. She said things had been hard lately, that she hadn't meant the things she said at dinner. The third was defensive again, saying she thought I was stronger than that. And the last was one line. I don't want to lose you. I folded the letter and placed it on the bookshelf. Not to frame it, just to remember it existed. I didn't respond. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. Sometimes a wound has to stay closed. Reopening it doesn't heal. It just bleeds again. And I was tired of bleeding. She hadn't lost me because of money, or pride, or even disrespect. She lost me because she stopped recognizing me. I had turned invisible long before I stopped paying. The man she thought she could humiliate had already left the room. All I did was shut the door behind me. I started cooking again, reading more, even joined a small group at the community center for older men who had stories like mine. Turns out I wasn't alone. Turns out a lot of us were fathers who gave and gave and gave, only to be laughed at in the end. Not hated, just mocked, erased, and it felt good to be around people who understood, not out of bitterness, but out of shared experience. We weren't angry, we were just done. I started walking more, less weight on my chest, more peace in my mornings. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had. I was no longer a silent benefactor hiding in the corner. I was a man who had chosen himself, finally. And that felt like the first honest thing I had done in years. She would rebuild. I had no doubt. She was strong, resilient. But she would rebuild knowing the ceiling could fall. That the man she thought would always catch her had already caught himself. That's what changed everything. The absence wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. One she'd have to face every time she pulled out her wallet or sat down to dinner. A reminder that love isn't guaranteed. It's given. And if you spit on the hands that offer it, eventually those hands close. Not in anger, not in fists, but in silence.